Okay, then it is I'm so excited actually to introduce our guest teacher tonight. Um, I've been privileged to be in a Dharma study group with Adam this whole last year. I've really enjoyed his guidance. So I'm just gonna give a warm welcome to Adam, read his bio and introduce him, and then gratefully hand it over to you. So Adam Stonebraker has been practicing and studying meditation in various schools since 1999 and began teaching meditation, mindfulness, and yoga in 2010. He is a teacher and leadership council member with Sacred Mountain Sangha, that's Thanissaro and Kittisaro's teaching organization, and he leads teacher trainings, retreats, and workshops internationally in yin yoga, meditation, and mindfulness. Adam is a graduate of Sacred Mountain Sangha's 2-year Dharma Pala training and is a graduate and endorsed teacher with the Insight Yoga Institute. In addition, Adam earned his MA in Mindfulness Studies from Lesley University. Adam is committed to an all-inclusive Dharma where no aspect of the human experience is left out. He has particular interest in the transformative power of the natural world, interfaith dialogue, and the Bodhisattva way of life. Adam, I'm so pleased you're here. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Liz, so much for inviting me. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to tonight. First, is the sound okay? Sound okay? Okay, great. And this is my first time kind of doing this like dual Zoom live situation. So this is very exciting for me too. I've actually been following this Sangha for several years. I've always respected the teaching and the quality of the teaching and just this Sangha. So yeah, thank you, and I appreciate what you all do. I thought tonight we would start with just a little mini sit, just to kind of arrive and gather ourselves. And then we're going to do some chanting. If you don't feel comfortable with chanting, you can just listen. We'll have everybody muted, so you'll just be hearing me and yourself. Because if everybody's unmuted, it creates this cacophonous, really terrible noise. So we don't want that to happen. So we'll have everybody muted and you'll just hear me, and you can chant by yourself at home, or if you'd like to chant in the room, you can do that as well. And then after that, we'll do another longer sit, and then take a little break, and then we'll do some Dharma discussion. I'll have a talk, and then if there's time, we can do some Q&A. Does that sound okay? All right. So let's just find our seat. So the topic tonight is listening, and I'll have more to say about that later. But for now, we're just arriving in the body. Always like to do plenty of movement, just kind of little shaking, little stretching, perhaps some deeper breaths. Yeah, can really get into it. Perhaps you've just gotten home from work in the past few hours. You kind of still feel the momentum from your day. It's really nice just to feel into the extremities and into the center. Yeah, and then with just a couple of nice deep long breaths, with emphasis particularly on the exhale. Nice long exhales to settle. And as we move into stillness, as we settle into this space, into this body, into this gathering, just find a sense of naturalness to your experience here. So with the breath, allowing the breath to be natural, which I know isn't the easiest thing, because once you bring your attention to your breath, it's difficult to not control the breath, but we just do the best we can. And then just allowing the awareness, the attention to just cascade down through the body. There's this full inhabitance of the body. This body includes our thinking mind. So we just notice the general tone of the mind, general movement of the mind, busyness, it's settling. Perhaps there's a particular thought that's repeating itself. That's just, it's okay, it's fine. Just here. And of course, as we inhabit the body, we notice how the body feels, if there's a sense of energy or lethargy, settledness, fullness, constriction, tightness. There's nothing wrong, nothing ideal, really. I'm just feeling out into space. So just feeling out into out of the front of the body, out into space, just a few feet, any amount, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet. Just feeling out. And just feeling out to the left side of the body, into the space, any amount. And feeling out to the left, or to the right side of the body, any amount. Feeling out of the back of the body, space behind the body. And then feeling into the space above the head. And then into the space below the body. All directions. Yeah, all directions. Breath, body, mind, space, all in one place, right here, right now, this moment. Just take a nice big inhale through the nose. And just let the air go. And again, inhale. And let the air go. One more time, inhale. Letting the air go and slowly opening the eyes, taking in vision, light. Zoom room. you all. Okay, so appreciate that. It was more for me than you, so thank you. um, yeah, so I like to do chanting, and my teachers, Tanisra and Kittasaro, chanting is a pretty big part of their Dharma, and it's something that I was actually pretty averse to at first. I was raised Catholic, and I had this conditioning of not liking to sing, and just like this aversion to that form of worship or practice, however you like to think of it. But they've really turned me onto it and I've been drawn to it for many different reasons. And one of the primary things I found with it is how it hones the capacity to listen. And so the chanting is less about the words, it's more about embodied sound. It's more about presence. Though there is that devotional aspect to the words, to the chanting, it doesn't have to be that way. You can really chant whatever you want to. It's really much more about the immediacy of the sound and the listening and the vibration and the physicality, and it can change your mood. It can change your energy just with a couple of lines. And so chanting now is a big part of my practice and a big part of my teaching, and something that I really encourage you to do, especially if you're pretty averse to it. It just has this way of cutting through, and kind of getting at the heart. So I encourage this, and I'm not going to do a whole lot of chanting. Do some pretty traditional chants, and if we have time, we might do a really fun chant. But you're probably familiar with these if you've been practicing and you've been involved in these Buddhist circles and sanghas for a while. But yeah, I'll talk about the chants. We'll go through them kind of line by line, call and response, and then we'll do it together. But let me just show you. There we go. So I know those who are gathered live, this may be difficult to see, but I'm trying to make it big so you can see it. So this top one here, we'll start with. So Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. It's an homage to the Buddha, to the Blessed One. And so Namo is I return or homage to the Buddha. And the Buddha talked about in the Mangala Sutta specifically that we should honor that which is worthy of honor. Emphasize that which is worthy of being emphasized. We emphasize a lot of things in our lives that aren't really worthy of emphasis. We pay attention to things that, including me, I do this too. We pay attention or put in the center of our lives, our experience, things that aren't really going to last. And so it's extra important for me and for us to emphasize things that are worthy to be emphasized. And the Buddha is that. And so you can think of the Buddha as the person of the Buddha, the person, the teacher, 2,600 years ago, who gave us these beautiful teachings. Or you could think of the Buddha in terms of our own true nature, our awake nature, our potential to be enlightened. It doesn't really matter. The Buddha's not going to get mad at you if you, however you chant this chant. It's just a really beautiful way to kind of to honor the tradition, to honor our practice, and to be tied to lineage, to bring it back to that. So Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened. Okay. So I'll chant it, and you'll repeat it so you can get used to the melody. We'll do that 3 times, and then we'll chant it together 3 times. So I'll do it with you too the second time. So you have a companion. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. And all of us. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. I'll do it again. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Together. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Again, namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. All together. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Probably enough of that one. Got it. So homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened. I always like to pause after the chants just to feel the vibration of the chant. It's one of the most ancient chants in all of Buddhism. Yeah. Thank you. We'll move down to it's a recollection of the triple jewel, which is another very ancient chant, probably going back to the time of the Buddha, I think. And I can send this out to you afterwards, but here we have the Pali and then the English translation. We're just doing the Pali, and so I'll just go through this line by line. I'll chant both with you, and then we'll go back up and do the whole thing together. Itipiso bhagava, itipiso bhagava, araham, araham, samma sambuddho, samma sambuddho, bija charana sampano, bija charana sampano, sugato, sugato, lokaviru, lokaviru, anutaro bodhisattva sarati, anutaro bodhisattva sarati, Sata deva manusanam, Sata deva manusanam, Udo Bhagavati, Udo Bhagavati, Svagato Bhagavata Dhammo, Svagato Bhagavato Dhammo, Sanditiko, Sanditiko, Akaliko, Akaliko, Ehipasiko, Ehipasiko. Oops. Openayiko, Openayiko, Pachatam Veditabo Vinuhiti, Pachatam Veditabo Vinuhiti, Supatipano bhagavato sabaka sango. Supatipano bhagavato sabaka sango. Ujupatipano bhagavato sabaka sango. Ujupatipano bhagavato sabaka sango. Naya patipano bhagavato sabaka sango. Naya patipano bhagavato sabaka sango. Sami chipatipano bhagavato sabaka sango. Sami chipatipano bhagavato sabaka sango. Yadidam chattari purisa yogani atta purisa pugala. Yaridam chattari purisa yogani atta purisa pugala. Esa bhagavato sabaka sango. Esa bhagavato sabaka sango. Ahunayo pahunayo dakinayo anjali karaniyo. Ahunayo pahunayo dakinayo anjali karaniyo. Anutaraham punyaketam lokasati. Anutaram punyaketam lokasati. All right, do it another time. And let me fix something really quickly. Yeah, okay. All together now. Feeling. Let's inhale together. Itipiso bhagava araham samma sambuddho bija charana sampano sugato lokavidu anutaro purisattama sarati sata deva manusanam Udo bhagavati sabhakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sanditiko Akaliko Ehipasiko Opanahiko Pachatam Beditabo Vinuhiti Supatipano Bhagavato Sabaka Sango Ujupatipano bhagavato sabaka sango naya patipano bhagavato sabaka sango sami chipatipano bhagavato sabaka sango yaridam chattari purisa yogani atta purisa pugala. Esa bhagavato sabaka sango ahunahiyo pahunahiyo dakinahiyo anjali karaniyo anutaram punyaketam lokasati. Pause here. We'll just stop the chanting there just for time reasons. Just feeling the vibration. Yeah, sometimes when we chant, can, the energy can kind of get trapped in the upper body, like the upper chest and the head. And it's the challenge is always, not just in chanting, but in everyday life, is to just draw the energy down towards the belly. And so the chanting becomes this whole body experience. And so this practice of embodiment, embodied listening, and embodied speaking are interlinked, interwoven. It's going right into our meditation now. I'm feeling the remnants of that, and I always, again, like to honor the Pali language, the privilege that we have to speak it and chant it and hear it. It's kind of a miracle that it's here, and just that link that we have all the way back to the Buddha. I think of the millions of practitioners pass down these teachings, first few hundred years, all from memory. It's kind of incredible. People who died, devoted their lives, gave their lives to the teaching, to preserve the teaching. And not to forget the Asian lineage from which we draw. So the listening that we do in this contemplative practice isn't necessarily with the ears. Bodied listening, active opening. And then it's really a feeling in, feeling out. So can we open up the whole of the body to this experience that's happening right here, right now, receiving. Using our breath as support as we open up into listening. Take in sound. Receiving it with all of the body. It's as if every pore had a capacity to listen. What's really beautiful about this meditation too is that there's no such thing as a distraction. The neighbor's dog barking. Object. Loud neighbor upstairs becomes an object. Meditation. Possibility to awaken. Distraction itself can become an object of attention. near the end of the sit, just checking in again and notice if there's a contraction back in. See if you can, so this last little bit is open back out. Sometimes it can feel uncomfortable or destabilizing to open out too much, but just a little, maybe just that immediate space right around the body, receiving to your capacity. Receiving the sound of the bell, the whole of the body. Thank you all so much. Appreciate your practice, and take a little break now, right? A little bio break, a little stretch break. Okay, so yeah, these sort of Dharma reflections are inspired by a teacher named Zohar Lavi. I don't know if you all know who she is, but she's a really beautiful teacher in the UK and in Israel. And yeah, I really loved how she communicated this topic. A topic about listening and speaking. And so that's what I'll be talking about tonight. We'll see how long I go. I'll try to be done by 8:30. I think we can do it. And it's something I really like to talk about. Listening has become an important part of my practice, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. But and not just listening itself, but meditation as listening. Sort of talked about that a bit in the meditation. So listening both internally and also in how we meet the world and the relationship between those two things. And as we know, the great value of mindfulness practice is found in the ordinary activities of daily life, right? We have these extraordinary experiences. We might have these really enlightening experiences, these giant experiences. But they're not really sustainable. What's really sustainable is the noticing of things in our everyday life. Though these things can be very beautiful, again, they're not super sustainable. And listening is one of the the more ordinary experiences, or hearing rather, is one of the more ordinary experiences of our daily lives. And it's such a powerful vehicle for cultivating a spiritual life, a sacred life, mindfulness, insight, freedom, all of these things. And if we think of Dharma practice as the ability or the cultivation of seeing clearly, listening is a way to do this. Now that might sound strange, like listening as a way of seeing, but hopefully hopefully that'll make a little bit more sense later. But first, just defining terms, I was interested in the difference between hearing and listening. And you might already know this, but I get confused easily. But according to the dictionary, the Webster's Dictionary, hearing is the process or the function of, or the power of perceiving sound specifically. And Webster emphasized the word specifically. So I'm not sure why, but hearing is also the special sense by which noises and tones are received as stimuli. So it's the physical process of receiving vibration around us. Yeah. And then listening is to pay attention to sound, to hear something with thoughtful attention, to be alert, to catch an unexpected sound. And so we could hear without knowing that we're hearing. So we might be hearing everything that's happening around us, but we're really only listening if we're paying attention to what that sound is. And so hearing plus attention, or hearing plus mindfulness, equals listening. Yeah, which I think is kind of interesting. And as I mentioned in the meditation, the listening we refer to in contemplative circles isn't necessarily directed at sound, and doesn't necessarily require the capacity to hear. And so even if you have hearing limitations, you can still, there's still this capacity to listen. And when we listen to silence, or the sound of silence, what do we actually hear? That's something interesting to contemplate. So our sense experience is essentially consciousness filtered through particular physical structures, right? So same consciousness, different filter. So our senses are our connection with the physical world. So the Buddha talked about 6 senses. In the West, we talk about 5. The difference being, so we have sight, hearing, touch, smell, taste, and the Buddha talked about thinking as well, the thinking mind as a sense. And so rather than our thinking sense taking up the center of everything, which it typically does in most of our lives, and especially without knowledge of a contemplative, or without a contemplative practice, thinking is driving us all the time. But if we can move thinking to the periphery, along with all of the other senses, then we can fill that space in the center with being, or presence, or space, or something like this, which I think is a really interesting way to look at it. Because, I never, though I might think, I might consider my thinking to be me, like my thinking to be mistaken as me, but I never consider my sense of smell as me, or it's part of me, it's something I do. But I never think of it as like the whole of my experience. But if I take my thinking as just being an aspect or a sense, then that sort of disarms it a little bit. It de-emphasizes it. And then mindfulness and presence can sort of be at the center. And so that's a really interesting way to look at the senses in my experience. So to sense is to know experience, to know physical experience. And when we're practicing meditation, we're actually listening. We're actually listening to the body and the mind as we practice. When we sit down for meditation, we're feeling around what is the appropriate posture. We listen and we respond to feedback we receive. So this doesn't feel quite right, so I'm going to move like this. And so we're listening and receiving feedback. And so this listening and the response are right there intertwined. And so I'm moving around till I find that comfortable spot. Yeah. And that response is feeding the listening. And then I change my behavior based on that. So we listen to and for particular aspects of our experience. We might say we're tuning in or we're feeling into. And we use speech and language to direct our awareness to a meditation object or to bring ourselves back when we're distracted. This is the response. So there's listening and there's a response. They're intertwined. And if we look at our internal experience when we're meditating, there's a flow. There's a flow of inner listening and inner speech or inner response. And this might take the form of dialogue or just impressions. There's always this sort of this process going on in our mind. And as we practice, that process is supportive of what we're doing. Sometimes it's unsupportive, especially when you're first beginning and you start to become more aware of those inner voices. And right now, as we sit here, there's a similar flow between us, me and you. So I'm using speech to direct your attention to something in particular in your experience. And you're hearing and listening to what I'm saying. So there's a flow between our minds. And that flow between our minds is very similar to what happens within our own mind, between our own stimulus and response or listening and response. And one thing that I'm very interested in pointing to and exploring is what happens when we bring an interest and a sensitivity to this flow, to this process, when we include this knowing. Though it's happening all the time, we don't necessarily notice it. So this is what's going on, a flow of speaking and of listening within us and between us in many, many different ways. But what happens when we remember that both listening and speaking, whether internal or external, what happens when we start to understand that they aren't neutral? Yeah. They're not separate. They're not independent events. They're conditioned by many things, our listening and our speech. Conditioned by gender, by social norms, by ethnicity, by culture, by economic status, by personal history, by language even. With all of these things, there's different vocabulary, there's different symbolism. And nothing is independent of conditions, right? So everything is working off of everything else. So the invitation is to remember that this is happening, that this conditioning is constantly going on within ourselves and within all people and things around us, really. And to also contemplate, to open to that through speech, through listening, through communication, both inner and outer, we condition, we construct, and we create our inner life and also the world. So is this kind of making sense so far? This landing, yeah, I know it's a little bit abstract, but it's like something I've been thinking about. So one thing that all of this means is, here's this really powerful tool that we have to both create wisdom, but it's also a tool that constructs. It's constantly constructing all the time. We're constantly conditioning our experience based on our behavior, based on our choices, based on our thinking, based on our ignorance, our awareness, all of these things. We're constantly conditioning our experience. The Pali word for this, or this constructive activity, is sankhara. It's called sankhara, something I've been very fascinated with lately. The Sanskrit word is samskara. It's a really important concept in Buddhism. It's this conditioning apparatus within us. And so there's an activity to it, but there's also a constructed thing, a constructive thought, a constructive thinking, and there's also the process of creating that construction. And so sankhara can be it can be translated in many different ways. Construction, which is the one I like, but there's also volitional formation, program. I like this program idea, like I'm running on a program, like I'm conditioned, I have a particular experience, it creates this program and I'm running on that program. Form, these are all things that are just, it's all this idea of things created by our conditioning, or a fabricating power. Fabrication is a good word too. So it's both the construction and the process of constructing. And when we look at this internally, we can see that our inner dialogue can give form and continuity to these experiences that are constantly moving. You know, one of the biggest realizations of Buddhism and that Buddha taught is nothing's permanent. You know, things are constantly in motion. And so there's this part of us that is constantly trying to go against that process, is constantly trying to create form out of something that's formless, to find some type of solidity, some type of safety, so that we feel safe, rather than sort of giving over to this process of constant change. And so all of our experience, so these constructions are things that come together. There's nothing that's isolated. So this construction, again, is constantly happening. Everything is a coming together of parts. So our inner dialogue gives form and continuity to parts that are constantly changing. Yeah. This inner dialogue we have, it also stabilizes our attention so things can be expressed externally. So leading to actions and speech in the world. And so we form ideas, we form opinions, we form all of these things, and then that formation internally allows us to express things in the external world. And so this in turn strengthens our inner mental habits. It habituates us towards things, either good or bad. So this idea of we're constantly conditioning the future. This fabrication, this future intentions, future actions, all of these things we're creating right now in this moment. So it's this ongoing process, this cycle of communication. And again, these sankharas aren't bad. They can be skillful. They could also be unskillful. So in many ways, like our meditation practice is a sankhara in a sense. It's something that we do. It's a habit that we have. That's a very skillful one to have. And so much of our practice consists of listening to notice these constructions, these fabrications, analyzing whether they're conducive to how we want to live, and then making the necessary adjustments if needed, if they're not conducive to how we want to live. So for instance, replacing negative patterns with positive patterns. Yeah. Majjhima Nikaya, Buddha Sutta, middle length discourses of the Buddha. I like this excerpt. It says, a bhikkhu understands the ear and sounds and the fetter that arises dependent on both ear and sounds. He understands how the arising of the non-arisen fetter comes to be. So it's this idea of understanding this process. He understands how the abandoning of the arisen fetter comes to be. And he understands how the non-arising in the future of the abandoned fetter comes to be. Majjhima Nikaya, the 10th chapter. And one of the places we see this process play out in a very real way is in our relationships all the time. So, and in fact, our closest relationships may be the place where these formations are most glaringly obvious. And so in close relationships, we tend to create a unique solidity to our positions, to our arguments, to our opinions. We're very skilled at linking past events with present action, like you always do this, or here we go again, or this is the way I am. This is how I am. Or I will, or they will never change. It's always going to be like this. You know, these are like These are very solidified sankharas that are just there. And one of the things we can do is to free our friends and our partners from these things, but it's really difficult because they're so ingrained or thick or so solid. So rather than kind of allowing the flow of the arising and the falling of this naturalness that the Buddha taught, we give form and continuity to the appearance. That is really just an appearance as arising and falling and going through a process. And then the intention starts to build up, with the speech that we choose from that. So this hurt must be expressed. This has to be expressed to you in this moment. And if there's no space around this process of constructing, of creating, of solidifying, then it will be expressed in a certain way, perhaps from a conditioned pattern or in a way that is hurtful or harmful. But if there's awareness, there's different ways to process those things. So this is happening in the immediate right now. This is going on, and it's going on. As it's going on, it fabricates a certain view. It fabricates a view of the self, of the other and the self, of the situation, and it all builds up. And this all creates a habit of the mind, and this loop happens again and again and again and again until we see it and decide to do something a little bit different. And it's more likely to continue the more it happens. The patterns get more deeply ingrained. So it fabricates in the immediate, it constructs in the immediate, but it also habituates the mind going, into the future. Our future intentions, our inner mental patterns, like when we take things personally or we react with resentment. These are just patterns of hurt. And it might happen with other people, not just the same person. It's typically a pattern that we show throughout all of our relationships. And this is also where language plays an important role, of course. Language is not only a fabricating factor, but it's a significant one. It's something that we can notice. Like, language is really important. We can hear and we can learn to hear what's being said. So it's a very obvious one. And so this inner flow that I keep referring to can move out into the external, and it might be expressed. And when speech is expressed in the world, it also begins to fabricate or construct the experience of others as well. And so our speech, our language, our words have power over other people as well, because they'll construct ideas about us or about something we represent, and solidify that in their own minds and their own experiences. And so we see this everywhere. This is always happening. So along with with other conditions, what we say impacts how another will respond. And again, we can see this is really obvious. So a whole range of language choices comes into play here. So we can think of when we were in the midst of the COVID pandemic. When we were right in it. We were watching the news. You're listening. You're reading the paper, and words were being used like lockdown and isolation and shut in and locked up. All these words were being used, and that constructs a particular experience for us. Those aren't the best words to use, because what it does is it emphasizes only a certain aspect of our experience. That's what we're feeling. We're being told we're isolated, we're locked down, we're locked up. Like that, that's not a fun thing to do. It's not a good thing, a desirable thing. And it creates a view, something you want to get out of. And it's true to a certain extent, but what if we emphasized other aspects of that experience, the opportunities of it? as meditators, we were talking about the opportunity to practice, or to be, to be still or alone, or to practice with this challenge. So words, what if words in the media were around collective care, or compassion, or looking out for the other, or home, or retreat? Not that the media would ever use that word, but what if those words were being used rather than lockdown, locked up, isolated? It'd be a much different thing. And things like this make a huge difference, because again, it constructs a view that can be difficult to deconstruct. When you first heard Black Lives Matter, those words, when those words initially filtered through our conditioning, what did we think? How did those words impact us? As a white person, I was defensive at first. I'll admit that. I was like, what about me? What about my race? Like, I matter too. That was my initial thing. But then you start to listen, and you start to understand, and you start to hear other people's experience, and you start to learn, and then things change. So that broke a construction. That was a sankara that needed to dissolve, that needed to be deconstructed. So the words we use, our speech, it has a real impact, but it also provides an opportunity to bring light to things that we don't see. How about gendered language? Example is in the suttas, when they're translated, they're always translated in this very masculine way. It's like he, bhikkhus, bhikkhus, bhikkhus. We know the Buddha, in the Buddha Sangha, there were monks and nuns. They were seen as equals. There was no hierarchy there. How does that usage of the word he over and over and over and over and over and over again impact someone's experience? As a male, we may have these unconscious feelings of empowerment or privilege from that without even knowing it. They're talking about me. Or we might not even notice it, which I didn't. But what about to our female friends or our non-binary friends? How does that impact that, that condition? So perhaps this is something to look at, and notice. So we remember the impact, we remember the power of language and terminology as a society. And this is all part of listening. So much different than hearing, right? So what helps? What hurts? What matters? What's divisive? What supports justice? What's compassionate? Our language creates a pattern, and it impacts others deeply. What are they hearing? What do people hear from me? Can I step outside of myself and try to understand what people are receiving from me? So through our speech, we make the world, we make our own mind, and we make the world. We construct experience for ourselves and others, both internally and externally. Words have a lot of power, and they're inseparable from listening. The very first line of the Dhammapada 1:1, our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Suffering follows an evil thought as the wheels of a cart follow the oxen that draw it. Our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Joy follows a pure thought, like a shadow that never leaves. We're running out of time here, but I just want to tell this quick story here. There's this filmmaker, perhaps you've heard of her, named Dia Khan, if you've heard of her. And I just heard of her last week, 2 weeks ago. And she's best known for her films around controversial subjects, like jihad, and she made a movie about white supremacy called White Right that I'd recommend everything that she does, and this is why. So a few years back, she was interviewed by the BBC about diversity and multiculturalism. She speaks out, on these issues, and she's from the UK. And she made this kind of uncontroversial statement, at least she thought so. And so she was being asked about immigration in the UK, where she has spent most of her life. And she said something to this effect. She said, immigrants have to expect that when they move to a different culture, say England, that they can't bring their country with them. Like they're going to have to give some things up. Like their culture is not going to completely come over with them. And then she said, equally so, people of traditional British heritage who are here have to accept that the UK will never be a white-only society. It just never will be. And so in order to live together well, we have to just realize and accept that change is happening by the fact that we're here together. So kind of like uncontroversial. I mean, I can see where it could be controversial, but it's pretty much just stating facts. But this video of her, it went viral in kind of racist white supremacist circles in the US primarily. So she received death threats and really vile racist threats, violence. I mean, just terrible, terrible, terrible things that I would never repeat here. And so she thought to herself, she said, I have two ways I can deal with this. One, I can be afraid and hide. Or two, I can seek out and understand where this hatred is coming from. Is it possible to sit down and recognize each other's humanity? Would it still be possible to hate up close and personal? So beyond the rhetoric to getting to the human being. So she spent 1.5 years hanging out with white supremacists. She's a Muslim, Indian heritage, Muslim, brown, very brown. And she spent 1.5 years. At first, people wouldn't talk to her, but there was one person who would, and he actually was the head of the largest white supremacist organization in the US, the largest neo-Nazi organization in the US, president. And he said, all right, I'll give you an hour, come to this hotel, and we'll talk. So she was obviously very intimidated, but the interview ended up being five hours long, and then after that he invited her to come with them to their next rally, which was actually Charlottesville, the big rally there. And so she went, and it's really incredible to watch her method, because she doesn't argue. She doesn't try to push her point of view. All she does is listen. She listens. And they ask her, why did you give me so much time? She interviews other people too, and she says, nobody has asked me some of the questions that you've asked me. I've come across people who ask me questions, who are just trying to catch me out or have hostile conversation. You listened and also told me about your life, which I am not used to people doing. You are very sincere in your beliefs that you hold, and I disagree with you wholeheartedly, and I will spend my life fighting against what you believe, but you listened to me like nobody ever had before. And at some point when she's interviewing these leaders, at the end, she asks permission to read some of the emails that she received, these threats that she received. And it's incredible to hear her read these vile things to these leaders and watching these leaders react. Because they're meeting this person who's being very compassionate, who's listening, who's giving them time, who's loving them, who's giving compassion. And they just sort of melt. It's really, really powerful. Really, really powerful. You don't hear blame, you don't hear shaming, you don't hear finger pointing. There's interest, how does this make you feel? And you see the impact immediately. There's a softening, there's a discomfort. She kind of disarms them with her capacity for compassion, for her capacity to listen. It's incredibly, incredibly powerful. And as a result of this film, I think 3 or 4 of the leaders that she talked to have left their organizations, including the man who was the head of the largest white supremacist organization in the United States. He left. And they all at the end called her a friend, And it's because you became my friend, you know, you became my friend. So for communication to happen, there must be listening within ourselves and to others. I know I'm almost done here. And it needs to happen. And this includes listening when we're speaking. When is the right time to bring this in? So this is a really important teaching by the Buddha. So right speech, is it timely? What I say may be true and it may be appropriate, but is it the right time? Is it the right time to do this? Can this person in front of me hear this embodied listening? So when we're in conversation, we're hearing and we're listening, and the two are not the same, as we established earlier. The two are not the same on the outside, but they are the same. That this listening and the response, the speech and the listening, they're intertwined infinitely. So when we see the co-arising, the mutual dependence of speech, internal and external, and listening and impacting on each other, the way someone listens to us impacts what we say, impacts how we say it, and we know this. So this is true when we communicate between us, you and me, but also how we communicate within us, the way we listen to ourselves. And so these are always paralleling each other. This external communication is internal communication. Yeah. So how are we communicating? With patience or without patience? With harshness or with kindness? With expectation or openness? With internal and external compassion. So the way I listen to experience affects how experience is perceived and how it appears, and affects the range of responses that are available to me. So I had this exercise I wanted to do, but I know we don't have time, and I know I'm way over, but I just want to say thank you right now. Thank you for listening, and for your practice, and for inviting me into your Sangha. And hopefully something I said helped you. Yeah. Om Mani Padme Hum, which is the mantra of Kuan Yin. Kuan Yin is the one who hears the sounds of the world and responds with compassion. So Om Mani Padme Hum. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening, and hopefully we'll cross paths again in the future.
Thanks so much, Adam.